Hi everybody, this is Brian Koo with another ROK video. In recent months, there has been a lot of talk about the domain system in Rise of Kingdoms. In your own KVKs, you might have seen some kingdoms who qualified for the domain system. In Our Lost Kingdom, for example, there are 3 of the kingdoms who have a -1 at the end of their kingdom name. And that means that they also have a second domain in a different Lost Kingdom. Let's see if we can find... here's 2268, for example. 2268's second domain is in this much larger KVK, where there are upwards of 6 or 7 kingdoms per camp. And I believe that all of the other domain 2s from our same KVK are also in this alternate Alliance Invictus matchup that is separate, entirely separate from the Domain 1 matchup that we have here in our KVK. And one thing you'll notice is that my kingdom, Kingdom 1770, even though we are Imperium, we did not actually qualify for the domain system. And that is because to qualify for the domain system currently, you need 900 City Hall 25 cities, and if you meet that eligibility requirements, you can then select 800 cities to make up your Domain 1, and all the other cities in your kingdom will get thrown into Domain number 2. Now, I personally think the domain system is a very good thing. I think it's a great change to Rise of Kingdoms. It's not perfect, but it's a great change. But what they're talking about doing now is lowering the eligibility requirements to qualify for the domain system. And in the future, it will likely be the case that you only need 500 cities, 500 City Hall 25 cities, to qualify for the domain system. And then you'll also only be able to register 500 cities for your domain number 1. That's not official yet. That's just that's a number that Lilith has floated in some patch notes in the past or in a developer feedback post in the past. And, they're still soliciting feedback and still thinking through exactly how they want to roll out version 2 of the domain system. But, I think change is coming. I think that the Domain 2 system is going to be a bigger part of this game in the future. And, there are people who are watching this video right now who will likely be assigned to Domain 2s in their kingdoms. I know that I'm a pretty skillful player of Rise of Kingdoms, and I talk about sort of endgame stuff, but I nevertheless have plenty of casual players watching my videos, and the casual players in some of these kingdoms, the players who don't contribute enough in KVK, they're going to get assigned to Domain 2. And really what's nice about the domain system, in my opinion, is that instead of kicking all the players out of the kingdom because they don't contribute enough in KVK, you can instead assign them to Domain 2. They can still play and experience the Lost Kingdom. And then when Lost Kingdom is over, they can come back to the home kingdom. They can rejoin your main alliance. They can do things like Ark of Osiris, Silk Road, and all the other, team-oriented events that take place in Rise of Kingdoms. And, so that's going to be like a really good thing, I think. I think it's going to be very good that we don't have to kick out quite so many players after every KVK, that some of our long-term friends who have used to play this game seriously, but now play it more casually, they will have the option, or we will all collectively have the option, to put those people in Domain 2, and they can stay in the kingdom, they can play the game casually, and we don't have to zero them or force them to find a different kingdom to migrate to. Now, there is, of course, a downside to the Domain 2s, which is that it can potentially disrupt some of the other KVKs that these Domain 2s are a part of. If we look here at the Domain 2 that Kingdom 2268 is in, what you'll see is that, yes, these 3 Domain 2s probably don't have many players in it. I mean, 2268 is becoming a fairly small kingdom, so it's hard for me to imagine that this is a full, this is like a full 800 city domain here. But on the other hand, these are very small kingdoms that they're matched with. These are likely D and maybe occasionally C seed kingdoms that they're paired with here. And I really just think that there's going to be some people complaining about the Domain 2s. There's going to be a few people in Discord who talk about how the Domain 2s are ruining the matchup in these KVKs. But, honestly, I don't really buy that. I just don't think that... I don't think that these kingdoms in general are so big or so competitive that having one Domain 2 of, washed up whales or defunct farm accounts is really going to mess up a matchup like this so much. I mean, out of a kingdom list here of 5 kingdoms that are all D kingdoms, how many of these D seed kingdoms do you think are going to basically put almost no effort into fighting, have very little coordination, and maybe just, partake in 2 to 4 hours of fighting before hanging up their cleats? I think it's a fairly large number in a lot of these kingdoms. I just think, most D-seed kingdoms are pretty inactive. I'm sure I will get some pushback from players for being blind to what's happening in those smaller kingdoms, and I will admit to being sort of blind to that, but overall, I just think that the benefits of the domain system outweigh the fact that some KVKs might be negatively affected. And so let's go over what's good about the domain system. First and foremost, as I mentioned, you don't have to kick out quite as many players as you used to. Although kingdoms will still kick out some players because your entire roster will still apply to the Imperium requirements. And so if the Imperium requirements of the game stay the same, you'll still remove players because you want to get out of Imperium so you can bring in fresh blood. But there will be less removal of players from kingdoms with the domain system. Similarly, you will be able to take a break from the game without having to get kicked out of the kingdom or without negatively affecting your team in their next competitive KVK. If myself, for example, as one of the leaders in my kingdom, if I just get burnt out, if I, need to focus on other aspects of my life and I just cannot commit to being a leader in the next KVK, then what I can do is announce, hey, I'm going to domain 2 this next one, and my teammates will not register for me for the domain 1, and at that point it will just be impossible for me to participate. I can sit in zone 1. I guess I could potentially set markers if that really came down to it. But if you're in domain 2 and you migrate to domain 1, all you can do is, do stuff in the start zone, but you cannot teleport out of the start zone and you cannot send troops out of the start zone. So players will have a chance to take a break from the game, which after 5 or 6 years of playing the game, I think we've all earned a break, right? We can still collect our gold heads and materials every day, but we don't have to commit to a 6-week-long, very intense KVK, which is currently the situation. The current situation is that you really have to commit to one serious KVK after another because that's what your teammates want to do, and that's what the game is all about. Another benefit of the domain system is that I think it will probably balance things out a little bit. It'll make it a little bit easier to assess the relative strength of kingdoms. In the old matchmaking system, when Lilith purportedly just looked at the top 300 power cities and then based your matchmaking off the top 300 cities, and maybe they factored in kill points to an extent, kingdoms could essentially hide a ton of their strength within all of their T4 farms that they were building. And it was just very hard in the old matchmaking system to assess just how many T4 farms different people have. You can see right here, Berrywood Prime is a typical example of a T4 farm that can't be tracked by the old school matchmaking system. It's hard to imagine that a, impressive figure like Berrywood Prime could not be tracked by a system, but that really was the case, You couldn't you just couldn't factor in all the farms that kingdoms had when you were making matchmaking for Lost Kingdoms. But when kingdoms are limited to only having 500 cities, they're going to have to make choices about which farms to bring in. And most kingdoms, including my own kingdom, we're going to be limited in how many farms we can bring in. We're not going to be able to bring in all the farms we want to. We're going to have to make choices. And at that point, there's just going to be sort of a standard template for a lot of kingdoms where they have one main alliance of somewhere between 100 to 150 players. Those players will be factored into the domain system. And then everyone's going to have 300 to 350 or so farm accounts that will also get added in to the matchmaking rating of your kingdom. So I think it's going to balance out the matchmaking while also balancing out the in real life versus game commitment that we're all struggling to master in the current game. I mean, it's going to be nice to have that option of saying, hey, you know, I'm busy for the next few months. Throw me in Domain 2 for the next one. And on the flip side of that, you also might have players who are busy most of the year, but maybe one time per year, they might be able to play a serious KVK. And if they're an old friend who you've played this game with for a long time, it'll be nice to have them for that one serious KVK. Maybe they're a teacher, for example, and they have the summer off. The rest of the year, they're very busy. They have a family and a job, and they just can't commit to this game anymore. But for that summer time period, when we play one of these wars, that person can register for Domain 1 with the rest of us. We can play with them, and it can just be like a much healthier, positive experience, I think, as we sort of keep the game serious, but also give people options to play it casually and play it more at their own pace. Now, the final question here is, what is Domain 2 life going to be like in this game? You know, is Domain 2 going to be a wretched hive of scum and villainy? Or is it going to be a nice, friendly, grassy plain on which to explore your dreams and your hopes and aspirations? I think it's going to be a little bit more of the latter, actually. I think that playing in a Domain 2 is going to be fairly enjoyable. You know, my observation of this game is that there are many, many players who like to play this game fairly casually. Out of all the players in our kingdom who play Ark of Osiris on a regular basis, roughly half of them play in small Ark of Osiris matches of less than 15 people, where the competition level is lower and the seriousness for both our team and for the opposing team is just lower. It's a more casual, less competitive experience, and more than half of our Ark players choose to have that sort of experience rather than playing on a full team in a competitive way. In the same way, I think we see more than half of the kingdoms in this game opting to play the more casual KVK maps like King of the Nile and Heroic Anthem. Those are two of the most popular maps in Rise of Kingdoms. And I think it's because people just like to play this game in a more casual way. And so I do think that there will be some players who go into Domain 2 and find that the open field fighting is easier. You're not fighting against players who are as tough as in Domain 1. You know, if you're a player who's been in an A seed kingdom for years, who wants to take a break, and you find yourself in a Domain 2, you're going to suddenly be a lot more effective in the open field than you were fighting against whales in those A seed KVKs. You're going to be fighting against C seed kingdoms, D seed kingdoms, and other washed up Domain 2 players. And I think that's going to be fun for people. And I think there will be people who actually thrive in a Domain 2 type of scenario, not only as fighters, but potentially as leaders as well, because you'll need different leaders leading that Domain 2. The expectations will be much lower, but people will get the opportunity to set markers, build resource pits, plan the taking of passes, plan the taking of Ruined Crusader fortresses, and also doing diplomacy. You know, there will be Domain 2 players who have never been in a leadership chat before who will just you know, either voluntarily or by accident get thrown into leadership chats with the rest of their campmates, and they'll get to have a different experience in the game. Low pressure, different experience. I think that's a good thing as well. So I do hope that Lilith goes through with the changes to making more kingdoms eligible for Domain 2. I hope that other people are as excited about it as I am. I hope it plays out in the optimistic way that I'm predicting in this video. If you all know me, you know that I'm not a very optimistic person. I'm negative about a lot of things, but I do feel good about the domain system, and I hope to see many of us participating in it in the future. If we don't talk about it for a while, then maybe I'll see some of you in a Domain 2 somewhere down the road. And, you know, it'll be nice to get incredibly good trades against y'all. So anyway, if you made it this far in the video, please throw a like on it. That's a great way to support my channel. Subscribe to my channel if you've not done so already. And until next time, I will see you all on the flip side.